Hey everybody, Mrs. Avita here again to teach you how to create animal textures with a pencil. Now, there are lots of different types of textures that animals have, but I'm hoping that the animals that you chose fall under one of these categories. I have long fur, short fur, feathers, scales, and smooth. The way that you draw your lines is going to directly affect what texture your animal looks like it has. So in the case of an animal with long fur, you want to make sure that the lines are fairly long, but you also want to make sure that you're starting in a certain spot and the direction that the lines are going is consistent. So as you can see, I'm starting in the bottom left corner and then drawing the line up to the top right corner. I'm lifting my pencil after every line I make. We don't want to create scribbles, we want to create the illusion of many hairs. Now I'm going to move on to short fur, which is really similar, but all of the lines I'm making are going to be a lot shorter and a lot smaller. Again, notice I lift up my pencil after every mark that I make. This might seem tedious, but when you're drawing a small animal, it really doesn't take as long as you think, and it really does make your animal just look a lot more realistic and a lot nicer. So something else I wanted to mention, you might have noticed in my first square that I made it be a little bit lighter on the left side and then darker on the right side. Did you notice how I was able to do that? It wasn't actually because I pushed down harder with my pencil, although I did a little bit, but mainly it was just that I put more lines in the areas where I wanted it to be darker. If you only push down harder with your pencil, the lines that you create stop looking that much like fur lines. When you make your lines lightly and quickly, it makes the first part of the line a little bit thicker and the last part of the line a little bit thinner, and that's what makes it look a little bit more like a fur or a hair. So let me just erase these real quick because, like I said, it doesn't look very realistic. So I'm going to erase these and recreate our short fur with short, quick lines where I'm not pushing down too hard. But to make it darker, I'm going to just make many more lines where I want it to be darker. Now remember, you're going to be doing this inside of your animal drawing, not inside of a square, and the lightness or darkness is going to depend on the pattern that your animal has. This is something I'm going to go over near the end of this video. For now, let me show you how to draw feathers. So for feathers, you're going to draw tall, skinny U's that are next to each other, and the size of the U is going to represent the size of the feather. So you can have some smaller feathers, and then if you have longer feathers, like the kind that are on wings, you're going to just make the U even taller and bigger, but make sure it stays fairly skinny. If your U is a little bit too wide, it's going to not really look that much like a feather. Now for the largest feathers at the bottom of the wing, I like to draw two lines. So instead of doing one complete U, you can see I do one curved line going one direction, and then I turn and curve the other line going in the other direction. This is also where I add some detail, like the line going down the center of the feather and maybe where the feather's broken up into separate pieces a little bit. You know how feathers are not always perfectly together. The amount of detail is up to you really, and it depends on how close your animal is to us. Naturally, animals that are farther away, we can't see as much of their detail, whether it's fur, feathers, or anything else. Okay, so we're about halfway done here. Thanks for hanging in with me, guys. We have scales next, and there are different types of scales. There's fish scales, snake scales, dragon scales. You are allowed to do a mythical creature if you want to. And for fish scales, I'm also doing a U shape, but I'm connecting them a little bit more, and they're a lot more shallow. So instead of a tall, skinny U, they're more like a short, wide U. I also try to make sure that the rows are offset so that you can see the scales peeking out from behind one another. To represent a fish that maybe has a little less detail to it, or scales that are farther away that you can't see very well, or they're small, you can start to disconnect the U's. So I'm going to not connect them anymore and just sort of create a bunch of U's, but make sure that they're all facing the same direction or it will look a little weird. And now I'm just going back to add some detail in the in-between so you can see how you might transition from larger scales to smaller scales or something like that. Now if you're looking to make more reptilian scales like the kind snakes or dragons would have, I do almost the same exact thing, but I use V's instead of W's. So having that sharp point at the end of them makes it look less like a fish and more like it belongs to a reptile. Last but not least, we're going to move on to the smooth texture. To start, I color in the whole thing with the side of my pencil so that you don't see any lines, and I might smudge it out with my finger later. If you want to use a tissue, if you don't want to get your finger dirty, you can do that. And one of the key characteristics here is that this animal is probably shiny, like a frog. It's shiny because it's wet. So you can take an eraser and create those shine marks. I have a large eraser. I also have the eraser on the end of my pencil. It depends on what you have available to you. And then I will just outline it if I want the shine to be a little bit more visible. I don't always do this, but it kind of depends on what you want to go for. Now, if you have a creature that is smooth overall, but maybe has bumps like a toad, or some lizards like geckos or chameleons might be like this, I'm just going to do the same exact thing that I did to start, but instead of creating lines with my eraser, I'm going to create lots of little bumps. And maybe you're starting to see a pattern because these look just sort of like more U's, except they're upside down. And now I'm just going over the top of the shine to outline it so that you can really see those bumps, but the parts that I erased now look like they are shine marks on a bump. I have decided that this is not very dark, and I'd rather it be a little bit darker so that you really can see those bumps pop out a little bit more. So I'm just going to color over it one more time and do it again. So don't be afraid to do something like this. If you think that you need to change it, just go back and do it again. Now I'm going to erase what I need to erase, and hopefully you can tell now that it's a lot darker that you can see those shine marks a lot better. It makes the texture pop out a lot more. And the last thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to blend up a little bit so that each of those shine marks doesn't have such a harsh bottom, and it really makes it look like that bump is 3D popping out of the page. Now, many times animals have patterns on their fur or feathers or scales. They're not just one solid color. So I'm just going to show you real quick some options for what you can do to show patterns, because what you need to keep in mind is that you need to show the pattern, but you need to keep the texture there as well. So when you're doing something like fur, you can create some guiding lines, but you also have to make those fur lines inside of it. So for a tiger has fairly short fur, especially if it's this far away. So I'm drawing lots of little lines to represent the stripes. Now those are going to be the darker areas of the animal, but then I'm going to move on and do fewer little furs or lighter furs to show the lighter parts of the animal. Another thing you can do is if you have colored pencil at your house, you can totally do this with the right colored pencils. So you could do black lines for the black fur and orange lines for the orange fur. So just remember that any animal that has any pattern, you can draw the outline of the pattern, but you have to draw the little fur texture lines inside for this assignment. Here's just a secondary example for you. If you were going to do something like a cheetah, this is how I would do the spots. For feathers, after you've drawn your feathers, you can simply choose which feathers are darker than others, or which parts of the feather are darker than others. So maybe the bird has darker feathers near the bottom and lighter feathers near the top, or maybe the center of the feather is a little bit darker, or anything like that. Use your best judgment based on the photo of the bird that you're looking at. And once you have your scales drawn, I like to make sure that the base of the scale is a little bit darker than the top of the scale. So I will color the whole thing in lightly just so that everything starts with a light base color. But then I go back and I make the bottom of the scale, which would actually be like the top of the U or the top of the V, and I make that part a little bit darker. So this can be hard to see while my hand is in the way, but once my hand moves out of the way, you'll see that I'm coloring the bases of all of the scales dark and letting the tops of the scales or the edges of the scales stay light. And like I said about creating lots of little fur lines, this can be a little bit tedious, but if you're patient and you put a lot of effort into this, it really does make it look so cool and realistic, and your patience with this will definitely pay off. Now I'm going to add some spots just so that you can kind of see. Some animals with scales will have spots or stripe patterns, and to represent that, I'm just choosing a few of the scales that are going to be inside of that spot, and those are the scales that I'm going to color in a little bit darker. Now I saved the easiest for last because when you have a smooth creature, really all you have to do is put the lights and the darks where you need them to be before you add the smooth texture with your eraser. So anywhere where you might have stripes or spots, just add those in and smooth it out, and then you're ready to start to add your shine. So whatever type of shine you're going to need, you'll just do that right on top of the pattern that you have. So I will do this with some bumps and show you if you had maybe a striped gecko or something, you can add little bumps like this, and you can choose to outline the bumps to make them show up a little bit more, or you can leave them as is. I like to outline them because I think it shows up a little bit better. So this was a rundown of how to create all of these different textures, and hopefully this will help you put them onto your animal. So your assignment for this week is to take the 3 animals that you drew last week and add texture to them. If you would like an example of how I added texture to my animals, I'm going to be uploading that video as well, but you do not need to watch it if you're ready to just jump right in and give your animals some cool textures. Give it a shot and just make sure that you upload it by Thursday or Friday so that I can take a look at it. Thanks for watching this tutorial, and as always, feel free to reach out to me by email if you need any help. Have a great week!